Crime is something that we all come across in some form during our lives. Whether it's hearing about it on the news, witnessing it in our communities, or sadly, even becoming victims of it ourselves, crime is a part of life that touches everyone. When it's something as brutal and serious as murder, it shakes us to the core. We can't help but wonder, why? What would lead someone to commit such a horrific act? The psychology of crime is a complex topic, and there's rarely one clear answer. People commit crimes for many reasons, some of which might make sense in their own minds, but are completely hard for the rest of us to understand. The reasons for a crime are often tied to a person's life experiences, mental health struggles, drug abuse, and even childhood trauma. A person who commits violent acts might not have been born violent, but instead, they've been shaped by their environment, their experiences, and their choices. This brings us to Wade Stephen Wilson, a man whose life shows the dangerous intersection of mental health issues, substance abuse, and violent behavior. Wade's case isn't just about the crimes he committed. It's about how the system responds to people like him, how mental health and trauma are handled in the justice system, and whether someone who commits a crime like murder can be understood by their past. Wade Stephen Wilson was born on May 20, 1994, in Florida, to teenage parents. From the very beginning, Wade's life was off to a rough start. His parents couldn't care for him properly, and as a result, he was adopted by Steve and Candace Wilson, who raised him in Tallahassee, Florida. Unfortunately, adoption didn't fix the many issues Wade faced from a young age. He was described as a troubled child, someone who had difficulty fitting in and controlling his behavior. His childhood was marked by trouble at school, minor criminal activities, and early experimentation with drugs. Wade's environment wasn't ideal, and as he grew older, his issues seemed to multiply. Instead of receiving the care and guidance he needed, he began spiraling further into dangerous behavior. Wade wasn't someone who easily followed the rules, and he didn't know how to cope with the stress and emotions that came from growing up in a tough environment. As Wade entered his teenage years, his problems deepened. He started getting into trouble in bigger ways. He was no longer just skipping class or causing small disruptions. By the time he was 18, Wade had already started engaging in more serious criminal activities like theft, assault, and even firearms-related offenses. His first major run-in with the law occurred in 2012 when he was arrested for burglary and other offenses. Wade didn't learn from his first brush with the law. Instead, his life became more defined by criminal behavior. In 2013, Wade was sentenced to prison for burglary and grand theft. His time behind bars didn't fix his behavior. When he was released in 2014, instead of turning his life around, Wade continued his pattern of destructive behavior. Just a year after his release, Wade was accused of even more serious offenses. In 2015, he was charged with sexual battery and kidnapping after a woman claimed he had assaulted her in his car after a party. Even though the jury acquitted him, this event signaled a shift in Wade's life. He wasn't just a petty criminal anymore. He was involved in more violent, aggressive crimes. But instead of taking responsibility or seeking help, Wade simply carried on with his criminal ways. In 2017, Wade's criminal record grew even darker when he was caught stealing firearms. By this time, Wade had clearly moved beyond petty theft. He was involved in much more dangerous crimes. This was a major turning point in his life. His involvement in stealing weapons was a sign that he was heading toward even more serious violence. By 2018, Wade's life had become a full-blown mess. It wasn't just about small-time crimes anymore. He was involved in much darker, more dangerous activities. He was connected to a case involving Denise Williams, who had been convicted of conspiring to murder her husband. Wade allegedly tried to fabricate evidence for her, and even offered to kill Williams' husband for her. This showed that Wade wasn't just involved in regular crimes. He was now entangled in major, violent situations with serious consequences. At this point, it was clear to anyone who had followed Wade's life that he wasn't going to stop. His violent behavior was only escalating, and there seemed to be no way out for him. But things didn't get better. Rather, they worsened. In February 2019, Wade was accused of assaulting his ex-girlfriend. She reported that he had strangled her, and while the charges of kidnapping and rape weren't pursued, this was another alarming event in his growing list of violent behavior. Wade's tendency to lash out physically seemed to be a pattern, and it was clear that he was a danger to those around him. Then, on October 7, 2019, Wade crossed a line that would forever change the course of his life. On that day, he murdered two women, Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz. Both murders occurred within hours of each other, and both victims died in brutal, violent ways. Christine Melton, whom Wade met at a live music bar, was strangled to death in her home. Later that same day, Wade killed Diane Ruiz, a mother of two and a bartender, by strangling her and then running her over with a car. These murders weren't random or spur of the moment. They were planned. Wade lured Diane Ruiz into Christine's car under false pretenses, then killed her in a fit of rage. Afterward, Wade ran her over multiple times with his car. It's difficult to fully grasp the violence of what happened, but one thing was clear. Wade's actions were not only brutal, they were premeditated. After the murders, Wade did something that shocked everyone. He called his father, Stephen Testaseca, and confessed to the killings. Stephen, horrified by what he had just heard, called the police. Wade was arrested the following day. When questioned by detectives, Wade showed no remorse. In fact, he even said that he would be willing to do it again. These words were chilling. How could someone be so detached from the horror they had caused? When Wade went to trial, it wasn't just a legal battle. It became a public spectacle. Some people wanted to know why Wade had done it. Could his mental health issues and past trauma explain his actions? Should the fact that he had been struggling with substance abuse and head injuries be a factor in deciding his fate? Others argued that, despite his troubled past, Wade's actions were unforgivable. They didn't want to make excuses for someone who had taken two innocent lives in such a violent way. The defense team tried to argue that Wade's mental health was a major factor in his actions. They pointed to brain scans that showed trauma, which might have explained some of his impulsive and violent behaviors. Experts testified that Wade's brain injuries, along with his history of substance abuse, might have impaired his ability to make sound decisions. However, the prosecution argued that while Wade's mental health may have played a role, it was his drug use that was the bigger factor in his violent actions. One of the most emotional parts of the trial was when Wade's father, Stephen Testaseca, took the stand. Stephen described the phone call where Wade confessed to the murders. He recalled how his son admitted to strangling Diane Ruiz and running over her with a car because she wasn't dead yet. Wade didn't explain why he did it. Instead, he simply said, "I just wanted to do it." This statement shocked everyone in the courtroom. There was no remorse, no explanation, just a cold confession. Wade didn't seem to care about the consequences of his actions, and that made it clear that he was not just someone who had lost control in a moment of rage. He was someone who had the capacity to plan and commit murder without any emotional response. After the trial, the jury found Wade guilty of first-degree murder for both Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz. The question then became, what should Wade's punishment be? Many people argued that Wade's history of mental health struggles and substance abuse should be taken into account when deciding his sentence. Others believed that because of the brutal nature of his crimes, Wade deserved the death penalty. In the end, the jury recommended the death penalty for Wade. 9 jurors voted for the death penalty in the case of Christine Melton's murder, and 10 jurors voted for it in the case of Diane Ruiz's murder. The judge followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Wade to death in 2024. But the case didn't end there. Wade's defense team filed an appeal to the Florida Supreme Court, asking them to reconsider the death sentence. Even after his sentencing, Wade continued to show troubling behavior. While awaiting trial, he attempted an escape from prison with his cellmate. They planned it in detail, even arranging for a getaway car. The escape was unsuccessful, but it showed that Wade had no fear of breaking the law, even while locked up. His actions behind bars only reinforced the idea that Wade was a man who couldn't stop his violent tendencies. In 2020, Wade was involved in smuggling drugs into the prison. He was caught and charged with the offense. This just added to his list of illegal activities. He even pleaded guilty to smuggling drugs in exchange for a reduced sentence for the escape attempt. His behavior behind bars showed that, even in prison, Wade couldn't break free from his criminal habits. Wade Steven Wilson's case raises a lot of difficult questions. Some people feel sorry for him because of his mental health struggles and difficult past. Others argue that his brutal actions, especially the murders of 2 women, should be enough to justify the harshest punishment possible. Should we focus on Wade's troubled past, or should we focus solely on the severity of his crimes? This case challenges us to think about how we view crime, punishment, and mental health in the criminal justice system. Wade's story isn't just about the actions of one man. It's a reflection of a much larger conversation about crime, justice, and mental health. It forces us to think about how we balance understanding the reasons behind someone's behavior with holding them accountable for their actions. Should someone who has clearly committed a violent act be shown mercy because of their past struggles, or should the consequences of their actions be the only thing that matters? Wade Steven Wilson's case will continue to spark debate for years to come. It raises important questions about how we handle people with mental health issues, how we deal with those who commit violent crimes, and whether we should show any sympathy for people who have shown no remorse for their actions. While Wade's fate is uncertain, his story serves as a reminder of the complexity of crime, punishment, and justice. Crime affects everyone, no matter where we live. It can range from small acts like stealing to much more serious things that hurt people. But why do people commit crimes? To understand this, we need to look at the psychology behind it. It's not just about what people do, but about why they do it. A lot of times, crimes happen because of things that have happened to a person in their life. For example, if someone grew up in a home where they weren't cared for or treated badly, they might start to feel angry or lost. This can make them act out in ways that hurt others. Some people commit crimes because they feel like they're not in control of their lives and don't know how to deal with their emotions. In the case of Harmony Montgomery, her death shows how dangerous it can be when a person's pain is ignored, and how the systems meant to protect children can sometimes fail. It's a sad reminder of how important it is to pay attention to those who need help before it's too late. The case of Harmony Montgomery is one that shook an entire nation. It is a story of lost innocence, of promises broken, and of a little girl whose life was tragically stolen by the very person who should have protected her. Her name is one that will not be forgotten, not just because of the heartbreak of her disappearance, but because of the lessons her story has taught us. Lessons about failure in systems meant to protect, about the warning signs ignored, and an incident that can happen when children are overlooked. Harmony was born on June 7, 2014, in Manchester, New Hampshire, to Crystal Sorey and Adam Montgomery. From the start, her life was filled with challenges. She was born to a mother who struggled with her own demons and a father who, by all accounts, was not the type of man you would trust with the care of a child. At just 2 months old, Harmony was placed into foster care. This would be the first of many transitions she would face. While this is often the beginning of an uncertain journey for many children, Harmony's early years would be marked by both love and loss, care and neglect. Her story is a painful reminder of how the foster care system, while trying to do its best, often leaves children in a constant state of instability. Harmony found a new home with Tim and Michelle Raftery. They welcomed her into their family with open arms. Michelle remembers her as a sweet, vibrant child. Despite being partially blind in her left eye, Harmony was a curious little girl with an infectious smile. She had a younger half-brother, Jameson, and she took her role as his big sister very seriously. Harmony was always looking out for him, playing with him, helping him when he needed it. She was a joyful and caring child, full of life and potential. But, despite the love she received in her foster home, Harmony's life would soon take another unexpected and tragic turn. In 2018, Harmony's biological mother, Crystal, lost custody of both her children. This was a decision that would haunt everyone involved. The court deemed Crystal unfit to care for her children, and Harmony and Jameson were both taken from her. Jameson would later be adopted by a loving couple, Blair and Jonathan Miller, who gave him the stable life he needed. But Harmony's journey took a much darker path. In 2019, a decision was made that would forever change her life. Adam Montgomery, her biological father, was awarded full custody of Harmony. Despite his troubled past, despite the evidence of his volatile temper, a judge handed Harmony back to the very person who had failed her before. This was the beginning of a nightmare that no one could have predicted. Adam Montgomery's history was one marked by violence, instability, and criminal behavior. But somehow, despite all of this, a judge decided that he was fit to care for his daughter. This decision raised many eyebrows, especially among those who had seen Adam's violent tendencies. And it didn't take long for those fears to become reality. When Harmony moved back into Adam's home with his wife, Kayla, and their 2 sons, things began to unravel quickly. Adam's temper was unpredictable. He lashed out at Harmony for small things. She was a little girl who was struggling with special needs, but instead of receiving help, she was met with violence. The abuse started small, bruises on her body, unexplained injuries, but it escalated quickly. Adam's uncle, Kevin Montgomery, was one of the first to notice the signs of abuse. He saw that Harmony had a black eye and confronted Adam about it, but Adam didn't seem ashamed. In fact, he seemed completely indifferent to the pain he was causing his own daughter. When Kevin asked him about the black eye, Adam's response was chilling. He simply said he had bashed her around. Kevin was horrified by this admission, and he reported it to Child Protective Services. But, like so many other cases, his concerns were ignored. Nothing was done. Harmony was left in a dangerous environment with a father who cared more about his anger than his daughter's well-being. As the months went on, Harmony's situation grew worse. Adam and Kayla were evicted from their home and began living in a homeless shelter. Harmony was only 5 years old at the time, but she was already enduring the type of violence that no child should ever have to experience. She had trouble with potty training, and instead of receiving help or understanding, she was beaten for it. Adam's frustration with her behavior turned into violent outbursts. And then, on a dark day in 2019, it happened. Harmony Montgomery was murdered. It's difficult to imagine the fear and pain that little girl must have felt in her final moments. Adam, in a fit of rage, beat Harmony to death. Afterward, he took her lifeless body and hid it in a duffel bag, concealing his crime from the world. But Adam didn't stop there. He lied. He pretended that nothing had happened. He told people that Harmony was living with her mother, even though Crystal hadn't seen her daughter in months. For 2 years, Harmony was gone, and no one knew the truth. Her body was hidden, her life taken, and her name was lost in the system that failed to protect her. As time passed, Harmony's mother, Crystal, grew increasingly concerned. Adam had failed to bring Harmony for a Thanksgiving visit, and Crystal became more and more worried. She tried reaching out to him, asking about Harmony's whereabouts. But Adam didn't respond. He blocked her messages and refused to acknowledge her. Crystal's worst fears were realized when she could no longer get in touch with her daughter. Crystal filed a missing person report, desperate for answers. But even then, the authorities didn't move quickly enough. Adam, in the meantime, continued to lie. He told people that Harmony was living with her mother, even though Crystal had no idea where her daughter was. It wasn't until December 2021 that the investigation began in earnest. The Manchester Police Department launched a full investigation into Harmony's disappearance, and the truth began to slowly emerge. The investigation uncovered evidence of Adam's violence, his lies, and his attempts to cover up the murder. Authorities interviewed people who had been close to Adam and learned about his abusive behavior. It became clear that Harmony had not just disappeared. She had been murdered. The evidence began to mount, and on January 22, 2022, the police confirmed what many had feared. Harmony Montgomery was dead, and her father was responsible. The case against Adam Montgomery moved quickly from there. The trial began on February 8, 2024, in Hillsborough County Superior Court. Adam was charged with second-degree murder and falsifying physical evidence. The trial captivated the public, with people across the nation following the case closely. The prosecution laid out a detailed case against Adam, showing how his violence had escalated over the years, how he had abused his daughter, and how he had tried to cover up the crime after killing her. Kayla Montgomery, Adam's wife, became a key witness for the prosecution. She testified against her husband, recounting the abuse she had witnessed and the final moments of Harmony's life. Kayla described how Adam had beaten Harmony, how he had hidden her body, and how she had been too afraid to speak up until now. Her testimony painted Adam as a monster, someone who had no compassion for his own daughter. The defense tried to argue that there was no concrete evidence proving that Harmony had been murdered. They pointed out that her body had never been found. But the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses, including Adam's own family, testified to his violent behavior. The jury had no doubt in their minds. On February 22, 2024, the jury reached their verdict. Adam Montgomery was guilty of second-degree murder and falsifying physical evidence. The courtroom was filled with mixed emotions, relief that justice had been served, but a deep, heartbreaking sadness that it had taken so long for Harmony's voice to be heard. Adam Montgomery was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison. The judge made it clear that this sentence was to be served consecutively with the sentence Adam was already serving for unrelated weapons charges. While this sentence could never bring Harmony back, it was a small step toward justice for a child who had been so brutally taken from the world. The story of Harmony Montgomery doesn't end with Adam's conviction. In the wake of her death, there has been a growing demand for change in the child protective system. People have begun to ask, how could a father like Adam Montgomery ever be given custody of a child? How could so many warning signs have been ignored? Harmony's case has become a symbol of everything wrong with a system that is meant to protect children but often fails to do so. Her story has sparked a national conversation about the need for better oversight of child welfare cases, more thorough investigations, and a more unified approach to ensuring children's safety. As a result of Harmony's case, several reforms have been proposed to address the flaws in child protective services. Lawmakers, child advocates, and families have come together to push for changes that would make it harder for children to slip through the cracks. There are calls for better communication between states, more frequent welfare checks, and a re-evaluation of custody decisions when there are signs of abuse. For Harmony's family, the pain of her loss will never go away. Crystal Sori, her mother, continues to mourn the daughter she lost. Her grief is compounded by the knowledge that the system failed Harmony in the worst possible way. But Crystal has vowed to keep her daughter's memory alive, to use her daughter's story to push for the changes that will save other children in the future. Harmony Montgomery will always be remembered, not just as a victim of abuse, but as a symbol of the urgent need for reform. Her death was a tragedy, but it has sparked a movement that, hopefully, will ensure that no other child has to suffer the way she did. In the end, Harmony's life was short, but it was full of potential, a potential that was snuffed out too soon. Her story will live on, not only in the hearts of those who loved her, but in the lives of the children who will be saved because of the changes made in her name. Remember her. Remember Harmony Montgomery, and never forget the lessons her life and death have taught us. Children are our future, and we must do everything in our power to protect them. Crime is something that affects us all in different ways, and when it's as horrifying as murder, it leaves us stunned and searching for answers. Why does someone commit such brutal acts? What could have driven them to take the life of another? And what if that crime is filmed, captured on video and photos by the person committing it? It forces us to ask even deeper questions. This is exactly what happened in the case of Kathleen Jo Henry, whose murder shocked the world when it was revealed that her killer, Brian Stephen Smith, not only murdered her, but also recorded the entire crime. Kathleen's death wasn't just violent. It was documented on an SD card that Smith had. 39 photos and 12 videos, taken during her assault and murder, were found on this card. The brutality of the crime, combined with the chilling footage, sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. In this case, the investigation didn't just uncover the typical evidence. It revealed the horrifying extent of the crime, leading to the arrest of a man whose past raised even more unsettling questions. Kathleen Jo Henry wasn't just a victim. She was a woman with a history, struggles, and dreams. Born on December 22, 1988, in Bethel, Alaska, Kathleen came from the Yupik Eskimo village of Eek. She was an Alaskan Native woman with a life that, like many, had its ups and downs. From a young age, she faced significant challenges, especially with addiction and legal troubles. But despite these struggles, Kathleen never stopped trying to improve her life. In 2012, she made a significant step toward turning things around by obtaining her GED while incarcerated at the Highland Mountain Correctional Center in Eagle River, Alaska. That moment was a testament to her resilience, her desire to better herself, and her belief that she could still carve out a better future. Yet, despite her determination, Kathleen's addiction continued to be a major obstacle, and her life was often marked by criminal charges and struggles with the law. At the time of her death, Kathleen was a single woman who had been divorced, and she was still trying to make sense of the world around her. She had a deep love for writing poetry, often sharing her thoughts and feelings through social media platforms like Facebook. These outlets allowed her to connect with others and express herself during a time when she was still working to put her past behind her. Brian Stephen Smith, the man accused of killing Kathleen, was far from the typical suspect. Born on March 23, 1971, in Queenstown, South Africa, Smith eventually made his way to the United States, where he became a U.S. citizen in September 2019. But what stood out most about Smith wasn't his background. It was his history of violence and what investigators discovered about his involvement in this brutal crime. Smith worked at the Town Place Suites Hotel in Anchorage, Alaska, where he rented a discounted room during the first days of September 2019. This hotel, where he had access to rooms, became the scene of Kathleen's final moments. Police later discovered that Smith had rented room 322 from September 2nd to 4th, and it was there that he allegedly murdered Kathleen. On September 4, 2019, Smith carried out the crime in that room. But his actions weren't just those of a typical killer. In a disturbing twist, Smith decided to document the entire murder. He took photographs and filmed videos during the assault and murder of Kathleen. This chilling evidence was later found by investigators on an SD card that was recovered from a phone that had been stolen from Smith's truck. This phone contained not only photographs but also video footage, clearly showing Smith's involvement in the crime. The discovery of the photos and videos was nothing short of horrifying. The images captured the assault and murder of a young woman, and the footage showed how cold and calculated Smith was. This wasn't an act of rage or violence in the heat of the moment. It was planned, and it was captured in graphic detail. The fact that Smith had gone so far as to record the crime raised even more disturbing questions about his mindset and his complete lack of remorse. Investigators were able to piece together Smith's involvement in the murder through this evidence. The phone, which had been stolen from his truck, led them directly to Smith and helped authorities confirm the identity of the killer. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the community. It was the complete disregard for the victim's dignity. Kathleen Henry, a woman who had fought through her struggles, was reduced to just another moment for Smith to record, a trophy in his twisted mind. As the investigation into Kathleen's murder continued, detectives with the Anchorage Police Department began connecting the dots between Smith and the crime. They recognized Smith from a previous investigation and quickly obtained a warrant for his arrest. On October 8, 2019, Smith was arrested at the Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport, where he had just returned from a trip. At the time, he was unaware that investigators had already identified him as the suspect. The evidence against Smith continued to pile up. Authorities discovered the disturbing photos and videos on the SD card, which were enough to charge him with the sexual assault and murder of Kathleen. But the shock didn't end there. Just days later, on October 17, 2019, Smith was charged with the murder of another woman, Veronica Abutchuk. Smith had allegedly confessed to the killing of Abutchuk and even led authorities to her body. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Smith's actions may have been part of a much larger pattern of violence. With the new revelation about Veronica Abutchuk's murder, authorities began to suspect that Smith might be a serial killer. His history and the way he operated left many wondering if there were more victims out there, hidden in the shadows of his past. Smith's background, both in the United States and in South Africa, became a focus for law enforcement. Investigators began working with both local and international authorities to understand the full extent of Smith's violent behavior. The more they learned about his past, the more troubling it became. There were indications that Smith had been involved in violent acts before, and detectives began to wonder how many other lives he might have destroyed. As the case against Brian Stephen Smith continued to develop, the public watched with both horror and fascination. The photos and videos had made this case unlike any other. The evidence was undeniable, and Smith's lack of remorse made it even more chilling. The trial was set to determine not only the fate of a man accused of horrific crimes, but also to answer the questions that had been raised about his psychological state and his motives. On February 22, 2024, a jury found Smith guilty of all charges against him, including the murder and sexual assault of Kathleen Jo Henry. The case had been one of the most difficult in recent memory, and the verdict was a step toward justice for Kathleen and her family. But the sentence was still to come. On July 12, 2024, Smith was sentenced to 226 years in prison. The sentence was a reflection of the severity of his crimes and the lasting impact they had on the families of the victims. It was a relief for many, though the questions of what drove Smith to commit such heinous acts still lingered in the minds of investigators and the public. Kathleen Jo Henry's life was one of resilience and struggle. She faced many challenges: addiction, criminal charges, and personal pain. But despite everything, she was someone who kept pushing forward.